Hello, Economics 311 students. This is an introductory look at what the course is going to entail. This is our first online lecture. We won't be having synchronous meetings. We'll be doing our learning asynchronously, but I will hold office hours each week, so keep an eye out for those times. We're going to just take a look at what's in the PowerPoint here. Be sure that you look in Blackboard for the other activities that you can complete this week to make sure that you learn all of the required concepts. So we're going to start with the course itself and some objectives. What is it that you're going to learn in this particular lesson, and what should you be able to do? And obviously you can see that you're going to define some terms and identify some things, some types of resources. And we're going to make some discernments between resources and the meaning of the term economics. So all of that is going to be our first look at this. So here's our definition. Economics is the study of individual choices concerning the use of resources among competing wants to maximize wealth. That is quite a lot, and it might not be what you expected it to be. It could be that you thought economics had a specific meaning, or it was only about money or transactions of that nature. But the fact is, at its heart, economics is a social science, and it concerns itself primarily with choices. And that's going to be an important thing we talk about a lot, this idea of choices in economics. And again, it may surprise you to find that that's really what we're looking at, is how are choices used to maximize wealth. So we're going to define some terms here before we go on, but I want you to have the idea that our whole purpose here is to understand how decision making maximizes our wealth and makes us better off. So economics then, to restate that definition, is getting the best and the most from scarce resources. And scarce resources, there's that word that we will define in a moment, but you probably are familiar with it already. You've probably heard the term in your lifetime, and you probably recognize that everything comes with some degree of scarcity, meaning that you can't have everything that you want. So if we redefine or reword our definition of economics, we can see that what we're talking about is using our resources as efficiently as possible to achieve goals. Another way of looking at wealth, because often the term wealth implies to us that it's about money exclusively, and certainly money is part of wealth. And when we consider our own personal wealth, we factor money into it. But really, it's about the how you doing. And I love this picture of Joey from Friends, and you know that he's pretty famous for that expression. And the how you doing is a really good way of measuring wealth, because it asks the question of how are things going for you, and what you consider valuable and important in your personal wealth evaluation is going to be what matters here. So it is, by definition, the subjective evaluation of well-being. And subjective, of course, means that we look at our lives, and what matters to us is subjectively how we view our well-being. For some people, it might be how much money have you got in the bank. For some people, it might be how are your kids doing? How are you feeling? How is your health? How is, any of the many things that matters to us. So it is a subjective look at how are you doing. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And I hope you kind of smile a little bit every time you think about wealth, and you think of that Joey moment, because it's a little cheesy, isn't it? The how you doing. And we want to think about how economics deals with the maximization of our wealth, the making ourselves better off in whatever way that we find valuable. Finance, of course, is part of economics, but it's not what we're going to be talking about in this course. Finance, it deals just with money exclusively and the movements of money. This course is going to talk more about the broader concept of economics and decision making. So some vocabulary that you're going to want to know for the course. You're going to want to have a goal. Of course, you know what goals are, but we're going to define it because as we're using it, with our students in the classroom, in the elementary K through 8 classroom, we want to make sure that we use this vocabulary and we make our students comfortable with it and use it often and bring it to them. So a lot of what we're going to be looking at, especially in this first lecture, is how we can make this accessible to our students. Ultimately, this is a course that is designed to get really good information into your hands so that you as a teacher can have a practical, useful way to apply it in your classroom. And that's really the goal. And what I think you're going to see very quickly is that I'm not just here to tell you things. It's really more of providing you with resources to be a great teacher. And in your great teaching, to include economic terms, vocabulary, concepts, principles, all of those things that are going to make your students ultimately better decision makers and better students. And we'll talk about how economics as a subject factors into it. But right now, I want you to keep in mind that all of this is for reaching your students and helping them understand. So goal is certainly something we want our students to know about. Resource is something we'll define in today's lesson. And a resource is anything used to produce goods or services. We're going to categorize our resources into 4 different types. So you can see them here. The first one is human capital. We'll spend a lot of time talking about human capital in this class and looking at how our students should recognize it and value it, because it is the most important resource that they have. It's the one that they as young people have the most control over, and therefore have the most responsibility to manage and to grow and to pay attention to. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about human capital. Really important. Next, we'll talk about natural resources, and we'll see that those are kind of what you think they are. They are present in nature. We often call them land. So sometimes we'll refer to natural as land resources. Basically, they are the gifts of nature. Physical capital are goods that are produced, man-made, and they're used to produce other goods and services. We'll look at some examples of those. And finally, the 4th type of resource that is very, very important is an entrepreneur, which is a person, and it's not the same as human capital. It is rather a person who organizes resources, takes a risk, and finds a new way of combining resources. And the really important part of the entrepreneurial activity is as being a resource is that they take risks. So we'll look at some of those here in a moment. So let's start by looking at our definition of goal. A goal, again, this is for our students' benefit, is something that people want to have or do. Now, we know that, but we want to make sure our students are well acquainted with what goals are. And this is from an early age, from the time before they're even in school, but certainly from the first schooling experiences that they have, they should start to learn about goals and the importance of setting goals, because if we're talking about maximizing wealth, we want to remember that that is done by achieving goals. So a goal is defined as something that people want to have or do, and there's lots of imagery attached to goals. Often a goal is seen as achieving, a pinnacle of something. I like this photo here because not only has he achieved something, but noticed that this figure here is pointing off to something in the future, which means that goals don't necessarily have an end point. They tend to be something where you stop for a moment and you continue on. But goals are certainly important, and our students need to understand what they are, and short-term, long-term goals, all of it, it's important for them to have a good understanding. And this is a cute image of a little tiger trying to eat, or a little kitten trying to eat a much larger bird. So we have some great stories available. And one of the stories that helps illustrate the concept of goal setting and goal achievement is A Chair for My Mother. This can be found in the course in Blackboard. I'm going to put a link in this, in Blackboard rather, with this PowerPoint so you can see that this is a story of a character who has several goals. And what I want you to do is, as you're listening to the story, because you're going to have a PowerPoint and an audio version of this, I want you to listen to the story and think about the different goals that are set. Now, a couple of things about stories with your students. One is that you want to be willing to read the story more than once. Often what happens if you tell your students, I'm going to read you a story and I want you to see if you can identify this, or the other, they're going to be so busy doing the assignment part of it that they may not hear the story. So this is just a personal preference of mine. But one thing you might want to do is to read the story once, just to listen to it, just to hear the story, enjoy it. Kids love to be read to, and I mean kids of all ages. I teach 12th grade economics right now, and my 12th grade students enjoy being read to every bit as much as younger students do. So don't be afraid to share a story with your classroom, and don't be afraid to read it more than once. There's no rush, and they probably get a lot of benefit. So the first time you might just want to listen to the story. It's a really wonderful story. The second time, what I would encourage you to do is to observe the different goals. And when you're presenting this with your students, you might consider having them, after the first reading, write down some goals that they observe and have them kind of show the process by which these goals were identified and pursued and achieved. And there are quite a few in this story. It's a really great story. It has lots and lots of content that you can use in different ways. Another story that you're going to want to know and listen to. Now, this one, we don't have the audio file on Blackboard. However, this is a story that I think is readily available in many different formats. I think you could find it online very easily, and maybe you're familiar with it already, but it's a good story to repeat for yourself. And it's also, if you're going to include it in your classroom, it's a great story for kids. And remember that kids can hear the same story again and again and again. And you might know this from personal experience, but they do not get bored. We might think that they will, but we kind of overestimate their boredom level sometimes. And they do enjoy the repetition that comes. So this story, again, is The Little Engine That Could. And it's a really familiar story of a little engine that encounters a problem. And again, just like the last one, I would encourage you to go through it and see if you can identify the many different goals that present themselves and the challenges and the outcomes. Some short-term goals that we can talk about with our students are things that we might set for ourselves as short-term goals. Sometimes we say, get through the week, right? Or get a good grade on a test, or clean the house. These are often adult goals, really. Do something nice for someone's birthday, or go to a party. Well, that won't be happening right now, will it? Or get your son or daughter to their soccer match. So these are all short-term goals that we see for ourselves. We want to make sure that our students are comfortable with the idea of goal setting. And so we might encourage them to come up with some short-term goals as well. So we might say, let's talk about what a short term looks like for depending on the age you're dealing with. Kindergartners are different than sixth graders, but still gauge the age appropriateness and talk to your students and have them identify and set some short-term goals. And theirs are going to be different, obviously. Do something fun after school. Do something fun this weekend. Learn to play a new game. Learn a new skill. All of these things are exciting for students, and we can sit down with them, and whatever age range they are, we can appropriately interact with them and have them set goals. And there's nothing a student likes more than to think about themselves and what they're going to do, and we can start to connect this with some really important aspects of economics. Some long-term goals. These would be some adult long-term goals that we might have. And we recognize that the longer term can be, in an indefinite length of time, or it can be pretty specific. We could say, I have a 5-year goal for something. But, find the right partner, raise healthy, happy children, learn about the things you teach, be a great teacher, have fun teaching, and earn enough money to live the lifestyle you want. These are clearly really worthy goals for us as adults. For our students, we might point to some different long-term goals. We might say, all right, let's talk 6 months into the future. Let's look 5 years into the future or even longer. So for students, we might find some long-term goals would be college and careers for when they're adults, the kinds of houses they want to buy, how many children they want. All of these could be really interesting discussions with our students and help them understand the concept of long-term goal setting too. And it's important that they see that goals have short and long-term versions of them and that they should always be engaged in the process of goal setting. So some long-term goals, we have some images here of different long-term goals for us perhaps or for our students. It's important to also know that we have social goals and our students should be aware of that as well. Social goals are goals that benefit all of society and we can incorporate a lot of history and understanding into social goal setting. So we can see here some really amazing social goal setters that were successful in setting and achieving really lofty goals. Cesar Chavez, Mahatma Gandhi, Golda Meir, Martin Luther King Jr., and of course Harriet Tubman. I don't know if you recognize this, but this is Harriet Tubman. All of these individuals had goals that were beyond themselves. They weren't goals for the individual, they were societal goals, and they all worked very hard and made sacrifices to achieve certain goals. And they weren't always successful the first time out, and maybe not even successful in their lifetime. However, they worked towards these social goals. We want our students to know that goals for society are important and valuable too, and should be part of our goal setting. So let's switch gears here and let's look at resources. Let's define them and then categorize them by the 4 types that we were looking at before. Resources, by definition, are the inputs that go into producing the things that we want. And we use these resources to help us achieve our goals. And so we categorize them into those 4 categories we saw before. And before we go into the categories, resources are the motivation for most historical events. So if we are teaching social sciences, that's really where our focus is going to be, is in the social sciences. We want to understand that most of the history we're going to be talking about had to do with obtaining and controlling resources. So the wars that we teach our students about and we talk about were all about gathering or obtaining access to resources. And in this class, we'll have a chance to look at some of these activities, Rome and Troy, for example, and we'll see that a lot of their history and a lot of the conflict that existed was directly related to resources, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Discovery, again, we'll be talking about some discovery in this class. The people that traveled the world, why did they do it? In search of resources. And these resources were the solutions in many cases to problems. They helped achieve goals with these resources. And colonization is, again, most of that is motivated by gaining access to resources. The French in America, the British in America, those were done for a variety of reasons, primarily to access resources. The French in America, we'll talk about this later, but they came here to expand the fur trapping business, for example. The British in America needed a larger trade market. So we'll have a chance as we're going through this course to talk about a lot of these things, but this is an important foundation. So let's go back to our categorization of our resources. The first one we talk about is human capital, and this is going to be our big focus with our students. We're going to talk a lot about human capital. Human capital is, of course, people, but it isn't just people. It is people with all of the characteristics that they bring to their labor. And we'll do a big exploration of the concept of human capital. So here we have a few images here, But I don't want you to think that human capital is just some boring, ordinary thing. It is the most important thing our students possess and the thing that we're going to be most excited about helping them understand and develop. The next one is land or natural resources. These are the gifts of nature. So pretty easy to identify. We've got wind and sunlight and water flowing in streams and mountains and all kinds of things, and timber as trees and fruit on trees. Lots of things that we could categorize. And all you have to do if you're trying to put it into a category is ask yourself, does it come from nature? And if so, it's going to be a land resource. Physical capital is man-made, and this is a important thing to know, and I want you to keep this in mind. Physical capital is not the same as human capital. It is man-made, and another way of thinking of physical capital is tools. They are man-made tools that are used to produce goods and services. So if you look at the images here, a pair of barber scissors is a tool that's created to provide the service of haircuts. So it's a capital good. It's used to produce something else, but it is itself a produced good. A hammer is quite literally a tool. A rolling pin used to bake and do other things. A factory, computers, all of these would be tools that are finished goods in and of themselves, but then are used to produce other goods and services. So physical capital, you're going to want to know that. Last type of resource is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, as was mentioned before, is risk-taking behavior that involves taking other resources, combining them in some new and innovative way, and creating something. The pictures here are a little bit misleading because what you're seeing are images of successful entrepreneurs, but the truth is most entrepreneurs experience a significant amount of failure. What separates the entrepreneur mindset, though, from others is that this type of individual can usually tolerate failure and discouragement well and continue on. Every individual you see in this picture has had some degree of struggle and failure in different areas of life. And if you want to read a really interesting story, I would encourage you to read up on Madam C.J. Walker. And ultimately what she did was she created hair products for African American women. But she lived in a time where this was extremely difficult for a lot of reasons. And it's worth reading up on her biography. Even when she started her business, she encountered all kinds of opposition from competitors. So really interesting story. But again, she had that entrepreneurial spirit and attitude that kept going even when things got difficult. If we look at the effect of entrepreneurs, we can see a lot of different things through history and currently. One good reminder of the importance or the impact of entrepreneurs is to look at how information has grown, our availability that we have of information. And so this is a good example. In September 1956, IBM launched the first computer with a hard disk drive. And as you can see, it weighed over a ton and it stored 5 megabytes of data. And today, we carry around 8, 16, 32, all kinds of different capacity, but we can carry that around in a jump drive and it carries so much more information and it's so much more lightweight and portable, and just an amazing amount of information is available to us because entrepreneurs who sought different ways of doing things were able to seek profit, try new things, take risks, fail, and try again. So similarly, we can see today that the price of memory continues to drop, and as recently as 2017, which even now, of course, it's much, much better, a gigabyte was $60 roughly in an external hard drive format. A terabyte is now available, which is 1,000 times more, and it's approximately the same price. And so this continues to be better and better, and again, all through the efforts of entrepreneurs. If you want to have a fun experiment in seeing the value of entrepreneurship, you can list some products that you use today that didn't exist in 1970. And if you start doing this with your own students, you'll find that they can just start rattling off a million things, new apps and new ideas and new technologies and inventions and medicines even, that show that we've gotten a lot of productive growth in the economy that didn't exist even 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And we can see that this is constant. And again, we can relate this to the presence of entrepreneurs. Similarly, you could list the products that you use now that didn't exist in 2000. And again, you can narrow it down to the last 20 years. And you could even say what products have become obsolete that existed in 2000 that we no longer use. And again, another list of things that has been removed because we have something better to replace it. So VCRs, even DVD players, have been largely replaced with streaming video. So lots and lots of things that show us the importance and the power of entrepreneurship and how it affects our lives. Social entrepreneurs are people who combine resources in new ways to achieve social goals. So we saw some examples of those earlier, but we see politicians who are looking for ways to change the way society interacts, religious leaders, congressional budget officer workers, educators. All of these are people that combine resources and make efforts to affect society on a larger scale. The next story I would have you read is The Tortilla Factory. Again, this is going to be linked in Blackboard for you. And as you're reading this, I would encourage you to have your students, of course, after listening to it once, just read through the story and let them enjoy it. And then the second time through, having categorized those different types of resources, have them list the resources they find in the book. And this could be a good class activity. All of these things are there for you to bring to your students to help them understand these different concepts. Specifically, this helps them to see the different types of resources and to have some experience categorizing them. And at the same time, they enjoy being read to. Another story that is a great story on its own, and then again for identifying resources within the story, is Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel. And this is a longer story, a little more involved, but I would encourage you to listen to it and see what you think. And then the second time through, see if you can't just start to categorize resources. And imagine that you could bring this to your students as an assignment or some sort of a fun project where they could be responsible for pulling out and categorizing the different resources found within the story. And I think that could be a really good experience and help them really solidify their understanding of the different types of resources. It's important to know that two things that we often want to think of as resources would not be categorized as resources. Resources, by our definition, are those four categories of productive goods or inputs to producing goods and services. So they are the literal resources that go into something. So think of a table. A table has land resources. It has capital resources that were used to make it. It has human labor resources, and then there's some level of entrepreneurship in putting it all together. What's not a resource is money and time. Money is not a resource. It is a valuable tool, and it certainly is useful for organizing resources and for making exchanges. And we'll talk in the course later about money and how we understand the value of money and what purposes it serves. But as far as being a productive resource, it is certainly a tool that can be used. In fact, it's sometimes used, the term financial capital tool is used to describe it. But for our purposes, we're going to categorize your resources only as our four: land, human capital, physical capital, and entrepreneurship. Money is not one of those resources. If you look at that table I was talking about, you're not going to find any money in the table. Certainly, money was a useful device for moving the resources around, but we're talking only what goes into producing goods and services. And at the same time is not a resource. It's not something that can be allocated. It's not something that can be spent or saved. It is simply the same 24 hours available to all of us. So we don't consider time to be a resource. Again, we make use of the time we have in different ways, but that has to do with allocating our actual resources. So we'll refer to these things later, but I just want to put that out there, that money and time are not part of what we would define as our productive resources. Understanding the concept of economics versus the term finance. And we already said money is not a resource, and economics is about resources. Finance is about money. So that is why we separate finance out from as the study of economics, because finance deals with something that's really not part of economics, which is money. Money is interesting. Money has a lot of meaning and value in our lives, but we'll talk about that later in a separate discussion. But for our look at understanding what economics is about, it's about the use of scarce resources to maximize our wealth. And since finance is about money and money is not a resource, we're going to save that discussion for another time. We're going to focus just on resources in economics. So the bad news is that we live in a world of scarcity. Scarcity means you can't have everything you want. And another way of saying that is here, our resources are insufficient to reach all of our goals or satisfy all of our wants. And I know that everybody has heard that before. You've been somewhere, somebody has said to you, probably a parent at some point, you can't have everything you want. I don't have enough to make this possible for you. And we know that we live in a world of scarcity. And sometimes that scarcity is related to not being able to achieve goals for different reasons, but we all know that scarcity exists. We can't have everything we want. And that means that we can't achieve all of our wants or goals. Another term that we don't use in economics is the word or the term needs. We refer to our wants and our goals. We don't refer to needs because the word need implies that there is no choice, there is no alternative. If I need something, it implies that without it, I will pass away. And so in economics, since we're talking about the use of choices to maximize our resources to achieve our goals and wants, we don't use the word need to describe the things that we achieve. We rather refer to the decision-making process related to our wants and goals. Another important thing to keep in mind. So we do live in a world of scarcity. And we can't have everything that we want. And we use Cookie Monster here as a mascot for scarcity, because if you think of Cookie Monster, you realize that no amount of cookies would ever satisfy Cookie Monster. So it's not that cookies are rare, but cookies for Cookie Monster are certainly scarce because he can't have all that he wants. He always wants more cookies than he has. And so we use him as a bit of a mascot because it really tells the story of scarcity. We can't have everything we want. We can't have all of the cookies, all of the things, all of the love, all of the sleep. All of the things we want, we experience scarcity. It's about the idea of resources versus goals. So how is it we achieve our goals when we only have limited resources? Our land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship come in limited supply. And so we have to make decisions about how we're going to achieve our goals with our limited and scarce, we call them scarce, resources. So the good news of this is economics. Economics lets us use a process of reasoning that helps us to maximize the use of the resources we do have to get as much as we can. And it goes back to our definition of economics. It's the efficient use of scarce resources to maximize wealth. Well, this is the good news. Economic thinking allows us to make choices that weigh cost and benefits and maximize the use of our scarce resources to achieve our goals and to maximize our wealth. So this is an important thing to understand, that economics is the good news, or economic thinking, more clearly, is the good news in a world of scarcity. Scarcity just a recap here, means that we can't have everything we want. And so that's the bad part. And we know that we live in a world of scarcity. Everybody is aware of this. Every student we're going to have knows this. We know this in our own lives. What we want to share with our students is the good news, which is that through economic reasoning, we can make decisions that allow us to get the most from the resources we have. So this is an exciting subject to teach to students, and it's really empowering to give our students at a very young age, the younger the better, that tells them that the good news is we can make choices. We can overcome this world of scarcity. We don't have to be unhappy about it. We can rather maximize our wealth, our personal well-being, by making choices. Economics is about using our resources to achieve our goals. And so the goals that our students might have, and we ourselves might encounter, would be decisions like what college to attend. What are we going to do? Economics is about choosing whether to work or not, and if so, what work we're going to take on. Who we're going to date, something like that. That might seem like a strange decision, but these are all economic decisions. Not just about money, but about how we're going to allocate our scarce human capital. If I'm a student, I want to know how can I make decisions that personalize or maximize my personal wealth. Well, part of my personal wealth are the relationships I have. So how can I maximize my scarce resource of human capital and make a decision about something like a relationship? Resources being used to achieve societal goals, like eliminating poverty. And again, this economic decision making is the powerful stuff that lets us weigh costs and benefits and use a process that helps us to maximize the use of our resources to achieve whatever goals we have. The environment, cleaning up the environment, dealing with endangered species, all of these are economic decisions, dealing with problems in society like drug abuse, how we can allocate resources to achieve the most education that we think is important. So our elementary students are likely to see their goals differently than the bigger picture. They're likely to see their goals as having fun and friends and learning to do things and making their parents happy and keeping teachers happy. Those tend to be really important focuses of our younger students. And the resource that we want to make sure they understand well is this really important resource of their human capital. It's very important that our students understand that of those 4 categories of resources, the one that they can control, that they have the most impact on, is their human capital, its growth, its application. And knowing this puts responsibility in their hands to develop their human capital. It also gives them a lot of power in decision making in their own lives. And we want them to understand the power of this one resource that really is their primary focus. Some examples of wealth maximization using scarce and valuable resources, and for a young student in particular, using their human capital, how can they use it to make themselves better off? Well, things like having a great time at a birthday party, or choosing an outfit, or buying some sort of music. CDs are a little bit of an outdated concept, but anymore they might buy a download. What friend to play with, what theme park to visit. These are things that students can decide for themselves by using their decision-making ability to use their scarce and valuable human capital. So why are we focusing on the K-8 classroom? Primarily because this is an excellent time for our students to learn about setting goals, learning to develop and use their human capital, understanding what it is, what's powerful about it, and how it can be grown and made into something even more powerful. Learning to make reasoned decisions, weighing costs and benefits, using that economic reasoning faculty. Analytical thinking, weighing costs and benefits, involves a good deal of analysis. And while students are naturally pretty good at this, we can focus on it and help them to develop that as a skill. And that's an important skill to go into life with. It's forward-looking, because economics is always about decision-making. We don't focus on past decisions or sunk costs, we'll call them. We are a discipline that is always looking to the future. We want our students thinking that way. We want them looking at how they can impact their future with their decision making. And finally, taking responsibility. And these are all qualities we want our students to develop in the K through 8 classroom so that as they go into middle school or high school or the adult world, that they have these skills. And decision making, it might seem like a strange thing to say, but decision making is a skill. And we want to teach them good decision making. And this is not to say that they won't make good decisions, because good has a little bit of a value judgment there. But what we're talking about here is using a process of decision making that weighs costs and benefits. So it's informed decision making, and it is made using a process that uses reason and rational thought to make decisions. And so for this reason, we're going to focus on the K through 8 classroom to make sure that we start to help our students recognize the power of their human capital and the importance of making decisions using the economic thought process. So here's the bottom line. This is what we know. Resources are not enough to satisfy our wants. We can't have everything we want. Because we can't have everything we want, we make choices. Choices have costs. Now, we haven't talked a lot about that yet, but we will. And this is a really important understanding. When we're teaching decision making, cost benefit analysis, we want to recognize the true costs of our choices. So this is a preview of that idea that all choices have costs. When we choose something, we necessarily give something else up. Because we know this kind of intuitively, we should be careful about the choices we make. And the question should always be, as we are making decisions and choosing how to use our resources, what is the best use? And this involves weighing the true costs against the perceived benefits. We'll talk about that. So to run down our topic of economics, just our definition of it, we have a problem, which is scarcity. We can't have everything we want. We live in a world where we don't have enough resources to satisfy all of our wants. The goal then is to maximize individual and societal wealth. And remember, wealth is that subjective evaluation of well-being. It's not about money necessarily, although money does factor into it, but it's about all the things that subjectively make us think, how am I doing? Remember that. How you doing? That's the question. The method that we achieve this wealth, or that we maximize wealth, is using economic reasoning. And this is going to be our focus. And this is really what we want to teach our students. Economic reasoning. How do we weigh costs and benefits accurately? That's our process that we want to teach our students so that they will be good decision makers. So we're going to look at some curricula through this process, and we'll look at a curriculum called Choices and Changes, and we'll introduce that, and that really deals with the K through 3 economics and how to implement it. What I think you'll enjoy about the way the course is set up is that you'll get a chance to see economics in the classroom at every level in the K through 8 classroom. And we'll talk eventually about how the state standards for California are set up, and then we'll look at lessons that apply economic standards in each of those grade levels. So you'll get lots of good things to use in your classroom and lots of good ideas. You'll get lesson plans that are contained within the study guides. And I hope you find a lot of really good applications for this, because part of going into teaching is the practical part of it. How do I do this? And I hope that in this class you're going to find lots of good tools for how to implement teaching in general and how to implement in particular economic thinking within your teaching. So Choices and Changes is going to be our K through 3 curriculum, and we'll look at lots of great stuff in there. It's standards based. It's literature oriented, and you probably already can see that in this lesson here, we incorporate literature to help reinforce the understanding of concepts. And this curricula also involves the parents in a big part, because it's so important that what they learn at school is reinforced at home. And it's done in ways that are fun and engaging for the parents. As we plan for the course, we're going to go through some stages here. We're going to look at the definition of economics, goals, resources. We've already talked about that a little bit today. Next lesson, we'll look at what is human capital specifically and ways that we can teach our students about the importance and power of human capital. We'll look at benefit cost analysis, that economic reasoning process for decision making. We'll talk about learning rather than teaching the standards, and we'll talk about different ways that teaching can be implemented to focus on the learning of students, not just the spouting of information. Very important part of learning to teach is learning to understand the role of the student and the teacher in the process. We'll look at markets, which is going to be a higher grade level application, but it's all based on what we're going to begin with. And then finally, we will look at money and how money factors into all of this. So never fear, we're not going to ignore the importance of money. We're just going to put it in its proper place once we have the basics established. We're going to continue on. We're going to look at benefit cost and market analysis related to ancient civilizations. And this is going to be in your 6th and 7th grade curriculum. Ancient civilizations and trade. We're going to have some great fun looking at the spice trade and maritime explorers. This would be your 6th and 7th grade curriculum as well. The American Revolution, probably an 8th grade curriculum. But all of these, we're going to take the economic concepts that we started with, and we're going to apply to these more advanced topics. And I think you'll find a lot of really great knowledge. First of all, it's just interesting stuff. And second of all, you probably get lots of great lesson ideas if you're going to teach in the upper grades. That's going to help you as well to get some ideas. How can I bring economics into my social studies curriculum? I think you'll really like it. We'll look at your benefit cost analysis, and that will be kind of an overarching theme through this whole thing. And so as we go forward, this is the path we're going to take. We're going to start with the very basics. We're going to grow through each one of these. We're going to apply them. So we're going to start with the basic concepts here, and then we will extend them and expand them. And I really look forward to a great semester with everybody, and we'll see you soon.